Special Agent Alicia Carter's fingers tightened around her coffee cup as the police cruiser's lights flashed in the cafe parking lot. The once peaceful suburban coffee shop suddenly felt hostile, its warm wood paneling and gentle jazz music a jarring contrast to her racing pulse. She hadn't done anything wrong. Her FBI training had taught her to always maintain a low profile off-duty. But something about the officer's approach set off warning bells in her mind. The heavy thud of boots on hardwood drew closer. Through the window's reflection, she caught the officer's face, pale, stern, with a sneer that spoke of something beyond routine patrol. His hand rested casually on his holster, a deliberate show of authority. The other patrons fell silent, their conversations dying like candles in a cold wind. This wasn't about law enforcement courtesy. This was about power, about putting someone in their place. As one of the few black female FBI agents in the bureau, Alicia knew that look all too well. But today, something was different. Today, she wasn't going to let it slide. At 32, Alicia Carter had already made her mark at the FBI's local field office. Her colleagues called her the Shadow, not just for her ability to work cases quietly and efficiently, but for her uncanny talent in spotting patterns others missed. 8 years of dedicated service had earned her a reputation for turning seemingly dead-end cases into major breakthroughs, particularly in civil rights violations and police misconduct investigations. She kept her dark curly hair pulled back in a neat bun, her suits pressed to perfection, and her desk meticulously organized, habits ingrained from her military father and schoolteacher mother. Growing up in a family that valued both discipline and justice had shaped her approach to law enforcement. Every morning, she arrived at the office precisely at 7:15 a.m., reviewed case files until 8 o'clock, and then joined the team briefing, a routine as predictable as the sunrise. But beneath her composed exterior lay a deep-seated frustration with the system she served. Despite her badge and credentials, Alicia still faced the same prejudices that had followed her from her childhood in South Carolina through her years at Quantico. She'd learned to channel that frustration into her work, using it to fuel her determination to create change from within. Today had been meant to be different. For the first time in weeks, she'd taken a day off. No cases, no files, no team meetings. She traded her usual blazer and badge for jeans and a casual blue sweater, letting her hair down both literally and figuratively. The local café, with its worn leather armchairs and perpetual scent of fresh coffee, was supposed to be her escape. A chance to decompress, to be just another person enjoying a quiet afternoon. Instead, the familiar weight of prejudice had found her here too, wrapped in a different uniform but carrying the same old burden. As the officer approached her table, Alicia felt her carefully constructed day of peace crumbling around her. "Ma'am," the officer's voice cut through the cafe's quiet atmosphere like a serrated knife. "I'm going to need to see some identification." He towered over her table, Officer Donnelly according to his nameplate, his stocky frame deliberately positioned to cast a shadow over her space. Alicia took a measured sip of her coffee, using the moment to assess him. Mid-40s, crew-cut, a slight smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth, everything about him screamed small-town authority used to getting his way. "May I ask why, Officer Donnelly?" His eyes narrowed at her calm tone. Most people squirmed under his scrutiny, but Alicia had stared down worse. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. Someone matching your description." "Suspicious activity?" Alicia's voice remained level, though her pulse quickened with familiar anger. "I've been sitting here reading for the past hour. What exactly is suspicious about that?" Donnelly's hand shifted to rest on his belt, inches from his holster, a subtle threat she'd seen too many times in her investigations. "Listen, either you can cooperate, or we can continue this conversation down at the station." The cafe had gone silent. Other patrons pretended to focus on their phones or coffees, but Alicia could feel their furtive glances. A young barista behind the counter watched with wide eyes, her hands frozen in the middle of wiping down the espresso machine. This was the moment where most people gave in, showed their ID, accepted the humiliation just to make it stop. But Alicia wasn't most people. "Officer Donnelly," she said, carefully placing her coffee cup down, "I want you to think very carefully about your next move. Because right now you're harassing a federal agent on her day off, and I don't think that's going to look good in your file." A flash of uncertainty crossed his face, quickly replaced by skepticism. "Federal agent? Right. Let's see some credentials then." Alicia reached slowly into her purse, maintaining eye contact. She could end this now, flash her badge and watch him backpedal. But something made her hesitate. This wasn't just about her anymore. How many others had he intimidated like this? How many had lacked the power to stand up to him? "Actually," she said, withdrawing her hand empty, "I'd like to speak with your supervisor first. I'm very interested in discussing your department's policies on random ID checks and what constitutes suspicious activity in this neighborhood." Donnelly's face flushed red. The power dynamic he'd expected was slipping away, and his fingers tightened on his belt. "Now you're interfering with an investigation. Last chance to cooperate before I place you under arrest." A few gasps echoed through the café. A middle-aged woman at the next table finally looked up from her laptop, her face troubled. Still, no one spoke up. "Under arrest?" Alicia stood slowly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. She was shorter than Donnelly, but something in her stance made him take a half-step back. "For sitting in a cafe? Please go ahead. I'd love to explain to a judge how you arrested someone for drinking coffee while black." The words hung in the air like smoke. Donnelly's jaw clenched as he realized he'd lost control of the situation. But rather than back down, his expression hardened into something more dangerous. "You think you're clever, don't you? Think you can come into my town and cause trouble? Your town?" Alicia raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware public servants owned the communities they're supposed to protect." Donnelly leaned in close, dropping his voice to a whisper meant only for her ears. "You've got a smart mouth. But trust me, lady, you don't want to make an enemy of me. I've got a long memory, and this is a small town." It was a threat, plain and simple. But instead of fear, Alicia felt a cold clarity settle over her. This wasn't just about one afternoon in a cafe anymore. This was about every person who'd ever sat where she sat, faced what she faced, but couldn't fight back. Officer Donnelly had just made a serious mistake. He'd given her a mission. Back at the FBI field office the next morning, Alicia stared at her computer screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. A half-dozen windows were open: police department records, civilian complaint databases, local news archives. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and strategies. The cafe confrontation played on repeat in her thoughts, but now with professional scrutiny rather than personal indignation. "You look like you're plotting someone's murder," a voice said from behind her. Special Agent Marcus Stevens leaned against her desk, 2 coffee cups in hand. He offered her one, steam rising from the lid. "Want to tell me why you're digging through local PD files at 7 in the morning?" Alicia accepted the coffee but didn't look away from her screen. "Ever hear of an Officer Donnelly? Works out of the Highland Park precinct?" Stephen's usually relaxed expression tightened slightly. "James Donnelly? Yeah, his name's come up in a few complaints over the years. Nothing that stuck." He paused, studying her face. "What did he do?" As Alicia recounted the previous day's events, Stephen's frown deepened. He pulled up a chair, any pretense of casual conversation gone. "That's bold, even for him. But Alicia, you know how these things usually go. Internal affairs will bury it, the union will protect him, and nothing changes." "I'm not filing a complaint," Alicia said, pulling up another database. "I'm building a case. Look at this." She turned her monitor toward Stevens. "In the past 18 months, there have been 27 informal complaints about officer conduct in Highland Park. 15 of them match Donnelly's patrol patterns. All minority victims, all during routine stops or checks, all dismissed without investigation. Stevens whistled low. That's a pattern. But it's still circumstantial. These complaints aren't even official records. Most people are too scared to file formal charges. Exactly. Alicia pulled up another window. But look at the locations. Coffee shops, business districts, community centers. He's not targeting random people, Stevens. He's going after professionals, community leaders, people with something to lose. It's systematic intimidation. Before Stevens could respond, their team lead, Sarah Chen, appeared at Alicia's desk. Carter, Stevens, we've got a briefing in 5 on the Martinez cartel case. Whatever this is, it'll have to wait. Alicia felt her jaw tighten. The Martinez case was huge, months of work tracking money laundering through local businesses. She couldn't afford distractions, but the thought of letting Donnelly continue his harassment made her stomach churn. I'll handle the Martinez briefing, Stevens said quietly as they walked to the conference room. You do what you need to do with this Donnelly thing. Just be careful. Cops protect their own. The briefing dragged on for 2 hours. Alicia's mind kept drifting to Donnelly, to the database searches she needed to run, to the witnesses she needed to interview. When her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, she glanced at it under the table. Heard you're asking questions about Officer Donnelly. Coffee? Maria Rodriguez, Highland Park Community Center. After the briefing, Alicia drove to the community center, a modest building with peeling paint and a small playground out front. Maria turned out to be a middle-aged Latina woman with sharp eyes and a stack of notebooks on her desk. We've been documenting incidents for years, Maria said, spreading out pages of handwritten notes. Not just Donnelly, but he's one of the worst. He has a way of showing up whenever our community starts making progress, new businesses, youth programs, voter registration drives. Always with some excuse about routine checks or suspicious activity reports. Alicia felt her pulse quickening as she photographed the notes. Why haven't these been reported? Maria's laugh was bitter. To who? The same department that lets him get away with it. The last person who filed a formal complaint had their business shut down for code violations a month later. No one can prove it was connected, but everyone got the message. Back in her car, Alicia's hands shook slightly as she typed out a text to Stevens. It's bigger than we thought. Need to meet. They met at a diner far from both the FBI office and Highland Park. As Alicia laid out what she'd learned, Stevens' usual easygoing demeanor vanished entirely. This isn't just harassment, he said, his voice low. This is coordinated suppression of an entire community. But proving it. I know, Alicia cut in. We need someone to go on record. Someone who can't be intimidated. You're thinking of the café incident. I'm thinking I might not be his only law enforcement victim. If we can find others. A shadow fell across their table. They looked up to find Sarah Chen standing there, her expression unreadable. If you're going to run an unauthorized investigation into local PD, she said quietly, you might want to pick a meeting spot that isn't owned by a retired cop. Alicia's heart sank, but Chen wasn't finished. Officer James Donnelly. Graduated Police Academy in 2005. 3 formal complaints expunged from his record between 2008 and 2010. His father was a captain in the same precinct, retired now but still politically connected. She slid into the booth beside Stevens. You're right about the pattern, but you're missing the bigger picture. Highland Park is gentrifying. Property values are rising. There's money flowing in, and certain people want to control who benefits from it. You knew about this? Stevens asked. We've been building a case for months, Chen replied. Very quietly. Donnelly's not just a racist cop with a power trip. He's muscle for a larger operation. Those business closures Maria told you about? They always get bought up by the same development company. Guess who sits on their board? Donnelly's father. Alicia breathed. Chen nodded. Among others. But we haven't been able to prove the connection between the harassment and the property deals. Until now. She looked pointedly at Alicia. Until he was stupid enough to threaten a federal agent in public. Alicia felt the weight of possibility settling on her shoulders. She could be the key to bringing down not just Donnelly, but an entire system of corruption. But the risk. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from an unknown number, but this one made her blood run cold. Nice car. Blue Honda, right? Parked on Oak Street? Be a shame if something happened to it. Some neighborhoods just aren't safe anymore. Chin read the message over her shoulder and cursed softly. They're watching you. We need to move fast, but carefully. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no going back. Alicia thought of Maria's notebooks, filled with years of documented abuse. She thought of the cafe patrons who looked away, trained by fear into silence. She thought of Donnelly's smirk, so confident in his untouchability. I'm sure, she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. But we're going to need help. The next 48 hours moved at a dizzying pace. Chin set up a secure office in the FBI building's basement, away from prying eyes. Evidence boards covered the walls, red string connecting photos, property records, and incident reports. At the center was a photograph of Donnelly, and branching out from him, a web of corruption that grew more complex by the hour. Another one, Stevens said, pinning up a new report. Marcus Johnson, owner of that new tech startup on Maple. Donnelly cited him for suspicious behavior last month. 2 weeks later, Health Department shut him down. Building sold last week to Highland Development Group. Alicia rubbed her temples, fighting exhaustion. They'd identified 12 similar cases in the past year alone. We need someone on the inside of Highland Development. These property records aren't enough to prove the connection. Working on it, Chin said, hanging up her phone. But we've got a bigger problem. My contact at Internal Affairs says Donnelly filed a harassment complaint against you this morning. Claims you're abusing your FBI authority to pursue a personal vendetta. That's ridiculous, Stevens protested, but Alicia held up a hand. No, it's smart. He's trying to discredit me before we can build our case. Make it look like I'm the one with a grudge. She stood up, pacing the cramped room. He knows we're investigating. That text about my car wasn't just a threat, it was a warning shot. Chen's phone buzzed again. The color drained from her face as she read the message. It's worse than that. The deputy director wants to see you. Now. The walk to the deputy director's office felt like a march to execution. Alicia's mind raced, trying to figure out how to explain her unauthorized investigation without revealing how close they were to cracking the case. But when she entered the office, she knew immediately that something was wrong. Deputy Director Walsh wasn't alone. Standing by the window was an older man with Donnelly's squared jaw and cold eyes, the former police captain himself. Beside him, a man in an expensive suit that screamed corporate lawyer. Agent Carter, Walsh said, his voice carefully neutral. These gentlemen have some concerns about your recent activities. The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in subtle threats and political pressure. The lawyer, representing Highland Development Group, hinted at lawsuits for harassment and interference with business operations. The elder Donnelly reminisced about his long friendship with several federal judges. Walsh sat silently, watching Alicia with an unreadable expression. Of course, the lawyer concluded smoothly. We're willing to forget this unfortunate situation. Professional courtesy, let's call it. Just terminate your unofficial investigation, and everything goes back to normal. Alicia felt a familiar clarity settling over her, the same one she'd experienced in the cafe. Normal, she repeated. Like systematically harassing minority business owners until they're forced to sell? That kind of normal? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The elder Donnelly stepped forward, all pretense of friendliness gone. Watch yourself, Agent. Careers end over less than this. Funny, Alicia said, standing up. I was about to say the same thing. She walked out of the office on shaking legs, immediately pulling out her phone. Chin, we've got maybe 24 hours before they shut us down. Tell me you found something. Better, Chin replied. I found someone. Remember Marcus Johnson, the tech startup guy? Turns out he didn't just roll over when they closed him down. He had security cameras, multiple angles of Donnelly's routine checks, and he was smart, backed everything up to secure servers. Alicia's heart raced. That's not enough to prove the development company connection. No, Chen agreed. But his cameras didn't just catch Donnelly. 2 days before the health department showed up, guess who visited the building? Our friend in the expensive suit, along with Donnelly Sr. Johnson's audio picked up some very interesting conversations about clearing out the undesirables. Where is Johnson now? Safe house in Arlington. He's ready to testify, but we need to move fast. Word is the development group is planning something big, multiple properties, all minority-owned businesses. They're calling it neighborhood renovation. Alicia's phone buzzed with another text. This one was a photo of her parents' house back in South Carolina, taken that morning. No message, just the image. Her hands clenched into fists. They're getting desperate, she told Chin. Set up the meeting with Johnson. Tonight. But when they arrived at the safe house, they found the door ajar. Inside, the apartment was empty, Johnson's laptop smashed on the floor. On the wall, someone had spray-painted a message. Should have taken the deal. Alicia stood in the destroyed apartment, her mind racing. They had hours, at most, before the deputy director shut down their investigation. Johnson was in the wind, possibly in danger. And somewhere out there, Donnelly was moving on his next targets, confident that he'd won again. What do we do? Stevens asked quietly. Alicia looked at the spray-painted threat, then at her phone with the photo of her parents' house. They'd wanted to scare her, to show their reach. Instead, they'd made a fatal mistake. Every threat, every act of intimidation was now evidence, a pattern that couldn't be ignored. We've been playing defense, she said. It's time to change the game. Chin, how many of the business owners from Maria's notebooks can you get to the FBI office in the next 2 hours? Maybe 15 or 20. Why? Because we're done investigating. We're going to make them come to us. Did you spot all the clues leading to Highland Development's corruption? Share your favorite moments from Alicia's investigation in the comments below. From the cafe confrontation to the final showdown, tell us which scenes resonated with you most. Plus, don't forget to follow us for exclusive behind-the-scenes content about the real-life cases that inspired this story. The FBI office lobby wasn't designed for press conferences, but by 9 p.m. it had become one. 23 business owners stood behind Alicia, each with their own story of harassment and intimidation. News cameras rolled as she laid out the pattern of corruption, projecting photos of each property that had been seized and resold to Highland Development. Officer Donnelly burst through the doors halfway through her presentation, his face crimson with rage. Behind him, his father and the corporate lawyer rushed to catch up, but it was too late. You're throwing away your career, Donnelly snarled, pushing toward the podium. 2 FBI agents moved to intercept him, but Alicia held up her hand. Actually, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphones, I'm doing my job. Protecting citizens from those who abuse their authority. She clicked to the next slide, security footage from Johnson's business showing both Donnelly's and the lawyer discussing their plans. Would you like to explain these conversations about clearing out undesirables to the press? The elder Donnelly's face went pale. The lawyer grabbed for his phone, but Chin was already stepping forward. Highland Development Group's accounts have been frozen pending a federal investigation, she announced. We have evidence of systematic civil rights violations, conspiracy, and corruption involving multiple city officials. You can't prove anything. Officer Donnelly spat, but his voice wavered. Alicia smiled. That's where you're wrong. Mr. Johnson? Marcus Johnson emerged from the crowd of reporters, holding up a flash drive. Complete backup of all surveillance footage, plus recordings of every threat made against me and my family. I believe the FBI has already verified its authenticity. The corporate lawyer started to speak, but the elder Donnelly cut him off with a sharp gesture. He looked at Alicia with a mixture of hatred and something like respect. You could have taken the deal, he said quietly. No, Alicia replied, thinking of every person who had been forced out of their community, every life disrupted by their greed and prejudice. I really couldn't have. As FBI agents moved to take Officer Donnelly into custody, he locked eyes with Alicia one last time. I was right about one thing, he said. You really don't belong in my town. Alicia watched as they led him away. No, Officer Donnelly. This was never your town. It belongs to all of us. The subsequent arrest sent shockwaves through Highland Park. By morning, half the precinct's command staff had been implicated, along with several city officials. Highland Development's properties were frozen, their schemes exposed. But more importantly, people were finally speaking up, sharing their stories without fear. 3 months later, Alicia sat in her favorite spot at the café, sipping a caramel latte and watching the community she'd helped protect flourish. Marcus Johnson's tech startup had reopened, along with several other businesses that had been forced to close. The Highland Park Community Center, once faded and forgotten, now hosted regular meetings where residents and police leadership worked together on rebuilding trust. Mind if I join you? Maria Rodriguez pulled out the chair across from her, setting down a thick folder. The Oversight Committee approved our proposal. Starting next month, every officer in the precinct will undergo mandatory civil rights training. And guess who they want to help develop the program? Alicia smiled, remembering the shy, fearful business owners who had stood behind her at the press conference. Now they were community leaders, actively involved in reshaping their neighborhood's future. They've come a long way. We all have, Maria replied. Though I hear the FBI's keeping you busy too. It was true. After Highland Park, similar cases had started emerging across the country, communities facing systematic harassment and displacement. Alicia's team had become the go-to resource for investigating civil rights violations and police corruption. Chun had even created a special task force, with Alicia and Stevens leading the training of new agents. Agent Carter? A young officer approached their table, one of the new recruits brought in to help rebuild the precinct. Just wanted to say thanks. What you did, it changed things. Not just here, but for a lot of us in law enforcement. Showed us what real justice looks like. After he left, Maria grinned. Look at you, inspiring the next generation. Alicia shook her head, but she felt a warmth in her chest. The cafe around them buzzed with life, people of all backgrounds sharing space without fear, local businesses thriving, a community healing. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Her phone buzzed with a text from Stevens. New case in Boston. Similar pattern. You in? Alicia looked around the cafe one last time, at everything they'd fought to protect. Then she picked up her coffee and stood. There was still work to be done, more communities that needed help, more voices waiting to be heard. Always, she texted back. Ready to dive deeper into Alicia Carter's world of justice and accountability? Subscribe now and join our community of readers passionate about stories that tackle real-world issues. With new chapters released weekly, you'll get an inside look at the cases that shape our society and the heroes who fight for change. Don't miss out on this thrilling journey into law enforcement reform. Have you witnessed or experienced similar situations in your community? Your voice matters, and sharing your story could inspire change. Join our discussion forum where readers connect, share experiences, and explore solutions together. Be part of the conversation that's helping to build stronger, more equitable communities.